So, it's officially that time of the month. And by that time of the month, I mean the time of the month when the official Boruto team starts to leak a couple of panels from the upcoming chapter. And quite honestly, every single month, this is my favorite part of the month. Why, you ask? Well, because when these official leaks come out, it makes it feel as though that my theories are about to be spot on. Now, while the actual chapter itself may have varying consequences to the validity of my theories, when the official leaks come out a couple of days before the chapter release, things are looking peachy over here. And this month, that streak hasn't ended. Because a couple of days ago, on the 14th, we got the first official leak from the upcoming Chapter 17 of Two Blue Vortex. And while some people are upset with this official leak, saying it doesn't reveal nearly enough about this upcoming chapter, I tend to disagree. Because while yes, Chapter 17 could very well see the beginning of the battle between Team 7, Ryu, and Matsuri, and therefore the first official leak not giving us any indication of whether that battle is going on at all could be considered a miss, the panel that we did get leaked showed us way more than a panel of a battle between Mitsuki and Ryu or something like that. And while that might sound like copium to you, I genuinely believe what's being displayed to us here with this first official leak has massive plot implications. Plot implications that could give us hints about Kashin Koji's motivations, the final fight of this arc, or maybe even the fact that there may not actually be a final fight of this arc. Yes, all that from 3 simple little images of Jura shopping in a bookstore in Konoha. But trust me when I say, those are 3 very important images. So with no further ado, let's dive directly into this official leak from the Boruto team, because today we're talking Jura has returned to Konoha. But before we get to talking on anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're thinking to yourself, wow, Nick, that's a really cool shirt, you're right, it is. It comes from my NCH Archive streetwear anime collection. If you love anime and you love streetwear, I'd recommend popping into the link in my description to check out my new line. But before we get into all that, today we gotta talk about our favorite recurring sponsor to the page, Grüns. Now, with an all new package. Yes, that's right, Grüns got a rebrand. Listen, being healthy doesn't have to be boring, and I love that the outside of Grüns' new packaging looks as fun and energetic as their gummies make me feel. But don't worry, what's truly important, the Grüns formula hasn't changed at all. They're still packing all the vitamins, supplements, and green nutrients you need and want in delicious gummy bears, with high quality and natural ingredients. See, Grüns is the kind of company that recommends you read their ingredients list. While other supplement companies feel shame about it, Grüns puts it in big, bold letters right here in the back. But for those of you who haven't got on the Grüns wave yet, what are these exactly? Well, they're a convenient and comprehensive formula packed into 8 gummy bears a day. They're not a multivitamin, a greens gummy, or even a probiotic. It's all of those things and then some at a fraction of the price. And they taste so good, you'll wish you could have 2 packs a day. And honestly, who's gonna stop you? 8 gummies are included in every snack pack because you can't fit this many nutrients in just one gummy. Trust me. They probably tried. And while generic multivitamins only include 7 to 9 vitamins, Grüns offers 20 plus vitamins and minerals, made from 60 plus whole food ingredients. But there's a lot more than just jamming as many ingredients in here as possible going on with Grüns. Grüns specifically takes care to dose their ingredients effectively. That is to say that when they give you a vitamin, they want you to get 100% of your daily recommended dose of that vitamin, because certain minerals and vitamins are known to be toxic at above 100% the recommended dose. And Grüns wants to make sure that your body is operating at 100% efficiency. So what are you guys waiting for? Taking care of yourself should be fun and tasty. To get up to 45% off your order of Grüns today, just click the link in my description. This is my second pack today. So the first leak of Chapter 17 is out, and it's from Boruto's official team. So what is the leak? What's going on in it, and what does it mean for the future of Boruto as a manga? Well, to break down what's going on in the leak isn't gonna take all that much time. In fact, it's gonna take no time whatsoever. All that we got in terms of the official leak was 3 images of Jura shopping in a bookstore with an arm full of books, presumably in Konoha. Now, I say presumably in Konoha because we've already seen Jura wander into bookstores in Konoha, and it was established by Kashin Koji that Jura identified Konoha as a place of great architectural, scientific and historical importance. And therefore, Jura was going to be shopping in any bookstore. It's probably safe to assume that those bookstores would be inside of Konoha. On top of this, something like this was predicted to happen in the last chapter, chapter 16, where Kashin Koji, in a conversation with Shikamaru, told Shikamaru to tell all of the bookstore clerks inside of Konoha to treat Jura like their #1 customer. And thus it appears as though that prediction from Kashin Koji is already coming true. And bookstore clerks all across Konoha are now currently trying to deal with the reality that the strongest guy on Earth, who may or may not be hostile to the concept of Konoha as a whole, is their new favorite customer. And thus, yes, on the surface level, not a whole lot happens in this leak. Cool, we see the main villain shopping for books. Who cares? And like, yeah, objectively, if you didn't dive into what was going on in this leak in the context of what it meant for the future of Boruto, it would be a boring piece of information to be given as a leak. But Jura casually shopping for books inside of Konoha has massive contextual implications. The first of which being that Kashin Koji was right. See, the 10 paths as an ability to see the future has been identified as relatively sketchy. Kashin Koji and any other 10 path users have the ability to see an infinite amount of futures. However, every single person who also gets to know about these futures because Kashin Koji tells them about it introduces an additional infinite futures that Kashin Koji now has to interact with, because none of these futures are built around the idea that Kashin Koji tells somebody else about the futures he saw. And thus every single person who knows about the futures that Kashin Koji has seen becomes a new singularity. And thus when it really boils down to it, 10 paths isn't that powerful as a future sight ability. In fact, 10 paths doesn't really amount to more than just having a simple predictive ability. See, obviously Kashin Koji can sit down and say that in the majority of the futures, the events of the timeline look something like this. But there's no guarantee that that's the timeline that's gonna happen. In fact, Kashin Koji has already illuminated to the point that the Boruto timeline that we currently know is walking down a tightrope of basically nigh impossibility. And therefore one could reason that Kashin Koji absolutely didn't see the current timeline they're in coming. And yet, when Kashin Koji had his conversation with Shikamaru through the medium of a toad, he told Shikamaru to go around to all of the bookstores in Konoha and tell the clerks of those bookstores to treat Jura like their #1 customer. And here we are, not one chapter later, and Jura is inside of Konoha shopping for books. And so Kashin Koji's 10 paths seem to be right, at least in the capacity that Jura is incredibly knowledge hungry and identifies Konoha as a place to satiate that thirst, or hunger. And what this tells us is that Kashin Koji is also probably correct about everything else he told to Shikamaru. I like the fact that Jura identifies Konoha as a place that should not be destroyed because of the amount of information that it holds, which means that simply by seeing Jura shopping in the bookstores of Konoha, we've identified the fact that Himawari is most likely safe within the confines of Konoha. And since we know that Shikamaru did listen to the advice of Kashin Koji, as after all, Kashin Koji told him to send Konohamaru, Mitsuki, and Sarada to the Land of Wind, and Shikamaru did just that, it's probably also safe to assume that Shikamaru listened to the other advice of Kashin Koji and advised all of the bookstore clerks in Konoha to treat Jura like their #1 customer. And thus, as it currently stands, in a rather interesting twist of fate, Kashin Koji is currently operating as Shikamaru's Shadow Hokage. In the same capacity that Jiraiya operated as Tsunade and Hiruzen Shadow Hokage, Kashin Koji is using his expertise gathered in the field to advise the Hokage in the best possible ways to deal with the incredibly powerful outside threats that are currently threatening the health of Konoha and its citizens. And that's really cool because obviously it draws a direct connection between Kashin Koji and Jiraiya. And it definitively opens the door to the idea of Kashin Koji coming to Konoha after the events of Boruto are over, and heavily bolsters the idea that Kashin Koji and Naruto are going to be able to meet one day, which will probably not only serve as a healing moment for Naruto, who never got to say goodbye to his teacher in Jiraiya, but will also probably serve as a watershed moment for Kashin Koji, as thematically it's been introduced multiple times throughout the duration of Boruto that clones do have some iteration of the memories of the person they're cloned from. And thus Kashin Koji clearly aligning himself with Konoha and Shikamaru opens the door to so many of the things that we wanted, like Jiraiya meeting Himawari in Boruto, or Jiraiya marrying Tsunade. And well, yes, absolutely, it won't be Jiraiya, it will be a clone of Jiraiya who possibly through the meeting of Naruto will be able to tap back into the memories of Jiraiya that he got from being a clone. And I think that's a really cool possibility. On top of all of this means that Kashin Koji is most likely making the best possible plans for the future using his 10 paths. And while we might be a little in the dark as to what those plans are, that that could be intentional, because the concept's already been introduced that the more people that are privy to the future, the lower the chance of the future that they've identified is going to happen will happen. And therefore, Boruto and Kashin Koji have been telling other characters in the story what they believe is going to happen, and therefore we, as the readers, aren't necessarily privy to what they believe the future is going to look like. But Kashin Koji being correct about Jura pulling up on Konoha means that most likely him advising Shikamaru to send Konoha, Mitsuki, and Sarada to battle against Ryu and Matsuri will most likely be the end for Ryu and Matsuri, because Kashin Koji was most likely able to identify that those three working together with the Sand siblings, and maybe Boruto sprinkled in there, was enough to cut down Ryu and Matsuri, that most likely they will be enough to cut down Ryu and Matsuri. But enough about Kashin Koji and his plans for the future. At the beginning of this video, I talked about how Jura shopping in this Konoha bookstore could either show us exactly how the final battle in this arc is going to go down, or prove to us that there may not actually be a final battle against Jura in this arc. And I want to talk about these two very different possibilities right now. See, when Kashin Koji first established to Shikamaru that all of the bookstore clerks in Konoha should treat Jura like their #1 customer, I said that more likely than not, we're now going to see Jura inside of Konoha, and now we have seen exactly that. That was obvious, though. The less obvious side of that equation, however, has to do with Kawaki. See, because we were all understood when we were told that Jura would maybe show up in Konoha, that he was absolutely going to show up in Konoha. And while the bookstore clerks in Konoha may listen to Shikamaru's guidance, that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is going to listen to Shikamaru's guidance. See, because as it currently stands, the Boruto world is in one of the weirder balancing acts we've ever seen. 3 of the 5 main characters, that being Konoha, Mitsuki, and Sarada, are in the land of Wind, and they're about to square off with Ryu and Matsuri. Tie that into the fact that at the end of chapter 16, we see Ryu and Matsuri staring down at a toad on the ground in between them, and this seems to imply, because Boruto's only able to jump to toads that are holding different shaped objects, that Boruto is also going to participate in this battle against the 2 Shinju. And while the idea of the original Boruto Team 7 coming back together to battle against 2 Shinju does sound fun and entertaining, it means that 3 out of the maybe 5 people in Boruto who stand a somewhat legitimate chance in a battle against the Shinju will be very, and I mean very far away from Konoha. And only one of those 3 people has the ability to get back to Konoha on a whim. And that person would be Boruto. And while Boruto is the most important person in this equation, obviously, I don't think Boruto is going to be jumping back to Konoha anytime soon. At least not while he's preoccupied in a battle against Ryu and Matsuri and trying to save Gaara's life. But the idea of Team 7 being away from Konoha in the one chapter where Jura pulls up to do some light Barnes and Noble shopping means that objectively, if Jura wanted to while out and actually attack Konoha, Konoha would be at its weakest possible state. Because as it currently stands, there's only really 3 people inside of Konoha who could possibly even try to defend against Jura, and that would be Daemon, who wouldn't do it, Kawaki, who already tried, and Delta, who didn't help. But what am I building at here? Am I saying that Jura's gonna get pissed off at the book selection in Konoha and level it as a result of his rage? And that it's gonna be up to Kawaki, Delta, and Daemon to battle it out against him? No, that's not what I'm saying. However, what I am saying is that there's currently nobody inside of Konoha who can control Kawaki. See, we didn't see Kawaki for the entirety of chapter 16. And that felt odd because chapter 15 left on such a massive cliffhanger that revolved entirely around Kawaki. See, chapter 15 of Two Blue Vortex ends with Boruto and Kawaki having a conversation on top of the stone heads. And in this conversation, Boruto reveals to Kawaki that Amado has placed limiters on Kawaki to make sure that he survives. Limiters that have overmaxed Kawaki's defensive and regenerative abilities, but minimized his offensive abilities. And thus Boruto tells Kawaki that if he wants to truly help in the battle against Jura and protect the things that Kawaki wants to protect, that Kawaki needs to get these limiters lifted off his body. And thus we assumed in some capacity we would be seeing Kawaki do just that in chapter 16. But no, we see nothing from Kawaki in chapter 16. But I don't think that's a trend that's going to continue. See, I believe chapter 17 is going to be the chapter in which Kawaki takes advantage of the fact that there is nobody inside of Konoha right now who he is adhering to. Yeah, Shikamaru's around, but Kawaki holds no respect for Shikamaru and has now basically confirmed his suspicions that Shikamaru is working with Boruto. Delta is basically Kawaki's helper, and while Delta will most likely try to protect Amado, I don't think there's really any worlds in which Delta is more powerful than Kawaki. Not because she's given me any reason to think that she's weak, I just don't think narratively that would make any sense. And that would leave with really the only person in Konoha who would be able to battle against Kawaki being Daemon, who wouldn't care what Kawaki was up to so long as it didn't affect Ada. And therefore, I do genuinely believe that chapter 17 is the chapter where we're going to see Kawaki get his limiters removed. And thus, I also have a pretty good feeling about the fact that in chapter 17, we'll see either the beginning or the entirety of the fight between Kawaki and Delta. See, because while Kawaki, like Code, may not be able to be controlled by Amado, Delta, who's essentially a straight cyborg created by Amado, most definitely can be controlled by Amado. And considering the fact that one, Amado was very upset about Boruto telling Kawaki these secrets, and two, very much wants Akebi to come back to life through the medium of Kawaki, will most likely try to fight tooth and nail to make sure that Kawaki's limiters stay on him. Because if Kawaki's limiters come off, Amado knows Kawaki will do something stupid. See, to truly theorize in a manga, you have to understand the reasoning and rationale of the characters. And to know characters does that idea apply more precisely than with high intellect characters. See, Amado is one of the most intelligent people in the entirety of the Boruto universe, and therefore his judge of character is one of the most precise and succinct in the Boruto universe. And therefore we have to try and understand why Amado would place these kind of limiters on Kawaki in the first place. And really there's only two reasons. One, Amado didn't want Kawaki to be that offensively powerful because Amado knew one day he would have to be able to beat Kawaki in a fight of sorts to use him as a conduit to bring Akebi back to life. Or two, Amado fully understood that if Kawaki had a level of offensive power that put him on par with basically everybody on Earth, he would either run out of control and destroy wide swaths of civilization, or eventually get a head so large that he would pick a fight that he couldn't win and die, closing the door on Amado being able to ever use Kawaki as a conduit to bring Akebi back to life. And what I think Amado most likely thought of all of these scenarios, the scenario out of these three that's currently the most pertinent is the last one. See, Kawaki has spent the entirety of Two Blue Vortex up until this point getting his teeth kicked in. And as Kawaki is probably the most self-indulgent, overconfident character in the entirety of the story, this has dealt a somewhat fatal blow to his ego. However, in chapter 15, it was established to him by Boruto that, hey, all of these losses you're racking up aren't necessarily your fault. They're Amado's, which has given Kawaki another reason to be ridiculously self-indulgent. Therefore, in the moment that Kawaki gets his limiters taken off him, all of the confidence that Kawaki will have lost in his battles against Mitsuki, Boruto, and Jura will come back to him immediately. And it's in that moment that I genuinely believe Kawaki will do something absurdly stupid. See, let's not forget that Kawaki is the bad guy of this story, while Jura is a temporary antagonist who's been established to be absurdly powerful, so powerful that Boruto and Kawaki have to work together. Kawaki is the overarching antagonist of this story. And as the antagonist, Kawaki is supposed to be antithetical to the point that Boruto is trying to live to display, which is that hard work pays off, the core message of all Naruto IP. Now, in a relative masterclass, if you ask me, Ikimoto has found a way to make Kawaki relevant in the power scaling of the universe without him working at all. And while this may give Kawaki a temporary power boost that it can maybe use to get a leg up on Boruto, I believe very genuinely that Ikimoto is taking inspiration for this arc from the Majin arc in DBZ, where Vegeta, who's sick of being defeated by Kakarot, gets a boost in power to become Majin Vegeta. And while the strength of Majin Vegeta allows for Vegeta to get a leg up on Goku, it doesn't allow for him to get a leg up on the big bad. And thus I believe chapter 17 will most likely focus around Kawaki getting this big boost in power and restoring his confidence as one of the more powerful people in the universe. But what does any of this have to do with Jura shopping in a bookstore? What's more dangerous than a man with a bruised ego and new power? The answer is nothing, especially if you're the guy shopping for books who bruised his ego. And therefore I believe that Jura being revealed to actually be shopping for books inside of Konoha gives credence to my theory. My theory that the battle against Jura will be kicked off when Kawaki falsely assumes that he'll be able to take on the Shinju 1v1. And that in actuality, the real reason that Konoha is destroyed isn't because Kawaki destroys it, but rather because Kawaki and Jura destroy it while battling it out. And therefore the reason that Boruto and Kawaki find themselves face to face on top of the destroyed stone faces is because Boruto is too busy fighting against Ryu and Matsuri to run back to Konoha to help Kawaki in his battle against the head Shinju. However, much like Goku and Vegeta coming together to make Vegeta or Gogeta, not until Boruto sweeps back onto the scene, presumably after defeating Ryu and Matsuri, will Kawaki and Boruto be able to get the upper hand on Jura. However, like I established, for Konoha at least, this will be too little too late. But I'm not saying that all of this is going to happen in chapter 17. It's only one chapter after all. However, what I am saying is that by Jura actually coming to Konoha and shopping in the bookstores, we established in chapter 17 that Jura is going to be in Konoha, possibly for Kawaki to stumble upon or to actively seek out. And Kawaki, with his newfound power and the memory of Jura kicking him halfway across the village still fresh in his mind, will possibly try to push his luck in a battle against the head Shinju. One, because he doesn't believe the head Shinju is that much more powerful than him, and two, because Kawaki doesn't want to work with Boruto. Kawaki, as it currently stands, is supposed to make the wrong move at every possible impasse. If Kawaki were to string together a line of good choices, one, Konoha probably wouldn't end up destroyed, and two, by the time that him and Boruto went face to face against each other, we'd kind of be torn on who we would root for. And while it could absolutely lend itself to more interesting writing and a more interesting conclusion, I just don't see the story going that way. In my mind, Kawaki has to be responsible for the destruction of Konoha. And I believe Jura planting a big old flag in the center of Konoha and saying, I'm shopping here, has all but guaranteed that. But then again, Jura planting his giant flag in the middle of Konoha and saying, I'm shopping here, may actually mean that this arc won't end with a final fight against Jura, as there's murmurings in the community that people believe that Jura may not actually end up being a villain, but rather just a character, a side character, a pacifist who isn't involved in the story in much of any capacity. Because there is a contingent, a small contingent, but still a contingent in the Boruto community, who believe that Jura's infinite quest for knowledge will put him on a somewhat comparable path to Orochimaru, where Jura will try to consume as much knowledge as possible, and during the process of consuming as much knowledge as possible, slowly but surely humanify himself. That is to say that the more information that Jura reads, the more bookstores that he visits, the more and more Jura will begin to stray away from his basal nature. And rather than Jura needing to consume Himawari, slowly but surely Jura will find meaning in life elsewhere outside of the consumption of the 12-year-old girl. It's a possibility that Jura will find real, actual meaning in life through the information he gathers from the books he gets from Konoha. Considering Konoha has a built-in stalemate to make sure that Jura doesn't eat Himawari, which is just make sure that Himawari doesn't leave Konoha, there could be a fair amount of time until Jura is put into a situation where he could possibly consume Himawari. And thus there could be a huge amount of time for Jura to consume as much information as possible, building out as full and robust a personality as possible. And the personality that Jura could stumble upon could be to identify the fact that he, as the Ten Tails, was created to be used. And therefore he now wants to find a purpose in life that aligns with his wants and not the wants of somebody else. And therefore Jura won't land on either side of the conflict, that being the Otsutsuki side or the human side. Because here's the thing, whatever side Jura lands on is probably going to end up being the winning side. And this is important because if Jura switched over to the side of humanity, kind of like when Daemon and Ada joined Konoha, he would immediately make all of the other characters in the story irrelevant because he would be so much more powerful than them. And therefore, if Jura is going to take himself through the medium of information out of the role of being the antagonist of this story, it has to be in a role that doesn't fight for either side because he throws the power balance way out of balance. But more likely than not, I do believe Jura actually showing up in Konoha and actually shopping at the bookstores does mean that Kawaki is going to take him for granted and try and push his luck in a 1v1 fight, which leads to the destruction of Konoha. But we'll just have to wait and see to see if I'm right. The real question is, do you guys think I'm right? Do you guys think Kawaki is going to be responsible for the destruction of Konoha, whether it be directly or indirectly? Tell me in the comments below. While you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. How are they going to rebuild Konoha this time? Is it going to be Ada? Is it going to be Omnipotence? It's probably going to be Ada and Omnipotence, isn't it?